Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Xcession Everything Service Management Podcast. I'm Daniel Gilby, joined as always by my co-host, Sunil Duggal.
Hello.
Hello. And today, just a shorter episode, potentially. We've not timed it as of yet, but we're going to be talking about Refresh from Freshworks 25, held at the Emirates Stadium a couple of weeks back at time of recording. We were very fortunate to be there. We were, in fact, gold sponsors, and we just wanted to share some of our views, some of our observations and takeaways from the day, from what was, at a headline, a really, really great day, wasn't it, Sunil?
It was, yeah, it was. But one of the things about Freshworks, I think, that I really like is that there is an energy and a vibe about the business. And, you know, they're trying to, all vendors are trying to do something different, right? But I think it comes across really well in that Freshworks community. So it was really good. It was a really good day.
Yeah, perfect venue, you know, easy to get to. As I say, Emirates Stadium. We had a nice carve out of the hospitality suites on the floor there. Lots of space, you know, that energy was pervasive, got to admit, right, throughout, really well organized, you know, lots of breakout sessions. And for me, you know, brilliant to hear Dennis Woodside, their CEO, do the keynote. You know, I think he framed it all very well, and we'll talk about some of the things that was kind of highlighted and what we should be expecting as both partners and you out there, the community in the service management world, can expect to see from Fresh coming down the track. And I think a couple of things they mentioned actually, so this was, like I say, a week or two ago now, where a lot of the stuff they talked about had actually landed into their live environment. So if you're using Fresh, one of their products, Service or Desk, you should expect to see that, and indeed speak to your AE if you're having challenges, perhaps getting that functionality enabled. And
speak to us.
Which what?
Speak to Xcession.
Or speak to Xcession, right?
Yeah.
And we can help you really bring it to life and capitalize on that additional capability.
Can I just a couple of things I want to add there, Dan?
Yeah,
so
sure.
In terms of just to echo the venue, so I will notwithstanding the fact that it was in a rival Premier League football team's ground, and you'll be unsurprised to hear that many comments were made about, you know, Arsenal Football Club. But the venue itself actually worked really, really well, right? And I was a bit apprehensive beforehand, thinking, you know, it's the hospitality suite of a football stadium really where you want to go, because you know, obviously it's around the pitch, right? But actually the movement from keynote area through to where the partner stands were with lunch, and then the breakout sessions worked really well. It flowed really well. The second thing I wanted to add was about number of attendees. So I believe there were about 500 attendees. They were in fact oversubscribed. So there were some unfortunate Freshworks employees who turned up in the morning and were stopped on the door by the bouncer and told to go home because because a whole bunch of customers had turned up, which is, I guess, a great problem to have. But about 500 attendees. Now, I did a bit of a finger in the air sort of count. I reckon there was probably about 50 partners all told who were there. I reckon there was probably maybe 50 to 75, I would guess, Freshworks employees that were there, including their entire exec function, which means that there were somewhere in the region of 300, 375 maybe customers or prospects, mainly customers. And I think that's quite a good haul, actually, you know, for Freshworks. So they did a really good job in terms of engaging their community, right, and getting people to attend. So yeah, well done. And the final note on this is that it was really well organized, wasn't it? You know, yeah. Callum, who, you know, UK-based guy who runs marketing, field marketing, I think they call it here, and, you know, did a superb job, right, in terms of organizing it. All the staff that worked at Freshworks were super helpful. Everything flowed, and I'm sure there were many issues that he dealt with behind the scenes, but from the outside, it flowed perfectly well. So he did a really, really excellent job.
No, I'd certainly echo that. Everything was on hand. If you needed something, there were people to help. And nothing else to add really, Sunil. So I guess we should get on to some of the new announcements that were made. There were some product discussions. There was, of course, the keynote. We talked about that, where some of these things were highlighted and teed up, and then they were gone into in greater detail throughout the day. Key one, I guess, Agentic AI, as if you've not heard enough of that in varying themes and forums throughout the year, but they have a huge push on Agentic AI with their native Freddy AI platform. So now, what were your kind of takeaways from the discussions there and the outlines?
Yeah. So before I talk about that, I might just take a quick step back, because I think understanding how Freshworks are positioning themselves in the market is really relevant to how they are going ahead with some of the new technology announcements, but more particularly to do with AI. So historically, Freshworks had an approach which was, what is the biggest addressable market we can talk to? And that for them meant SME, five-person business, right, all the way up to the enterprise. Somebody that wanted capability in IT and IT service management, in customer service management, in sales order management through Fresh Sales, in marketing through Fresh Marketeer. There was Fresh Team, I think, for HR, right? So if you go back 4 or 5 years, that's what Freshworks was. It was all things to all people. Now, I think they have significantly consolidated the focus to service, Fresh Service, which is ITSM, ESM, or in Freshworks language, that's EX or employee experience, and then customer service management through Fresh Desk, or in Freshworks language, that's EX, customer experience. So they have been much more clear in terms of what their target market is. The second thing is that a few years ago, they positioned themselves as ridiculously easy. I mean, I don't know that any ITSM or ESM software is ridiculously easy. So they have migrated that message to uncomplicated. And they're trying very hard, right, for the technology capabilities to be accessible to anybody. But what that also means, and where it comes back to AI, is that unlike, say, for example, ServiceNow, who have launched an incredibly broad, business-wide agentic AI capability, Freshworks have said, well, actually, we're going to focus our agentic AI into areas that we feel fit with that uncomplicated message. In other words, as a customer, you should be able to easily access this agentic capability, right, without having to have a big investment, a business-wide potentially investment, or an investment in terms of skills or third-party resources in order to enable it. Excuse me. So when they talk about agentic AI, they're talking about things like automatic resolution of customer requests, particularly relevant, for example, in that CX scenario. I've bought something, it isn't the thing that I wanted. The agentic AI recognizes the disparity between what the customer has and what they ordered, and goes ahead and issues a returns label and sends the new thing out, right? That doesn't need a person. That's an agent. Or, for example, in the EX world, identifying root cause. So, right, automatically going, here is a whole bunch of incidents. Let's do some root cause analysis on it and identify what that root cause could be. And then recommendation of next steps that an agent, for example, would pick up. So it's not quite right to say simple. I'm going to say uncomplicated. But yeah, accessible, right? Accessible agentic AI capability. I think that's really important to understand. That is actually how, in one of the ways that Freshworks are differentiating themselves.
Absolutely. And one of the things I took away from that as well is there's a theme around they're looking to build the Agentic AI studio. So again, probably following industry, kind of the way the industry is moving, looking at where they can have these agents, these Agentic AI agents, working on a vertical specific type use cases and building out that, I guess, a library or catalog of these things and making that more and more available, which is interesting to see, right? Again, following the theme that a number of other players in the ITSM space or service management space, ESM space are taking, right? Because there's a big investment in that area and a lot of gains to be made. But uncomplicated, certainly, easy and simple, perhaps. There's a little bit more to it than just that, and we will see. Time will tell, right?
Yeah. So some of the other things that they announced. So one which I think is well, actually, there's a few here. A couple of, really, I should say.
There were a lot of announcements. There were.
Yeah, there were quite a few, but there's a couple here that I think are particularly interesting and relevant. So one is around what they call Freddy AI Insights, which is using AI to surface, insights. And actually, one of the customers that we spoke to, Dan Hollands, who works at the Christie Hospital in Cancer Hospital in Manchester, has been using or has started using Freddy AI Insights as part of their early release program. So it's now officially released. The Christie were using it earlier. And he did say that it's becoming much more important to them because they're actually able to have much better visibility over their service management performance generally. So that's quite interesting. The other, which I thought was really interesting, actually, was what they're calling employee journeys. So to unpick what that means, it's broadening their enterprise service management capability with out-of-the-box workflows for different business functions. And I think that this is, again, a drive to make the technology accessible, right, to that addressable market. Yeah, so make it super easy to go. We have Freshservice in IT. We want to onboard HR. We want to onboard finance. We want to onboard facilities. Let's have templated out of the box, workflows or journeys, as they call it, right, to facilitate that. That's very useful. And then the other thing that I think is probably of note, but has its niche, right, is a specific version of Freshservice for MSPs. But just to qualify that, they said small to medium size MSPs.
Yeah, they made that explicitly clear. I remember being in the product, one of the product breakouts, and they were talking about the MSP version, but certainly said, what we're targeting at the minute is the small to medium MSPs, not the behemoths of that world, right? But interesting to see. I mean, obviously that will come. I guess there's an element of let's get this out, let's get it in place, and then work with those organizations to kind of round out any corners and get through any teething problems that may or may not come up.
Yeah, exactly. But Dan, you were quite heavily involved, or you sat in quite a lot of the partner sessions. So what was your take on the new partner programs as they're being rolled out?
Well, highly positive. There's a big focus on that now. More resource available within Fresh to be able to work with partners. I think there's a greater recognition that in terms of being able to do more, then having a broader and a better partner ecosystem in place, right, is only going to be a good thing. I think they're bringing in, or I got the sense they're bringing in kind of people who've had that experience with other organizations and have seen considerable success there, and are looking to take the learnings from that and replicate that in the most appropriate fashion. So a lot of focusing on partners, which is great for partners like Xcession. We're very pleased to be a Freshworks partner, I think it's fair to say. And from a customer's point of view, there's going to be better service that comes off of the back of that, because you have access to a wider pool of talent, a wider pool of experience. Obviously, the first point of call would always be Xcession, and then if we can't help you, then no one can. But certainly as well, if you're looking to do a migration type project, and if that's in your kind of roadmap and your wider strategy as a business, your business is growing, you perhaps need to do something to accommodate that from a service management point of view, having access to that partner base who have experience not only in that particular type of program of work, but also across a number of different solution sets is going to be absolutely invaluable. And it gives you that freedom to move, right? Whereas before, perhaps with less capability out there that you could draw upon and breadth of knowledge, that might have stymied any kind of innovation you were looking to undertake. So yeah, I think that's going to be not a game changer. Maybe it will be a game changer, but certainly it's a massive step forward in what I consider the right direction.
I completely agree with everything you've said there.
Really? Well, you heard it here first, folks, on the Xcession Everything Service Management podcast.
For the first time. And possibly the last, who knows?
Who knows?
The thing that I would add is that Freshworks has not been known for its partner ecosystem. I mean, we've been partners for a long time, but there are many people in Freshworks who thought that we had recently signed up, as an example. More importantly, I think customers have not been aware that there is a partner ecosystem. And one thing that I think we all recognize is that people like choice. You may well choose to go and work with Freshworks professional services because you believe that they offer the best solution, and indeed in some cases they will offer the best solution. But then you may also want the choice between Freshworks and potentially 2, 3, 4, whatever number of partners, because you might find that some partners are strong in some areas and others are strong in others. EX versus CX as a classic example, right? Xcession is, we are ITSM, ESM experts. We are EX experts. We do work with Freshdesk, but if, someone had 500 users running Freshdesk in a big retail environment, we spoke to one of those organizations, didn't we, Refresh? That isn't our bag, but yet there are other partners out there for whom they would be ideally positioned to support those customers. So actually, it was really quite gratifying to be able to sponsor the event. It was gratifying to see that other partners also sponsored the event. And it was gratifying to hear in some of the keynote addresses that partners were also referenced. Not just for us as partners, but specifically for customers, because of that element of choice, that element of broader expertise that you talked about, etc. And this big change,
the awareness piece, sorry, as well. Talking about just very quickly on a partner program, it's very refreshing, no pun intended, to see the kind of direction that they've taken. You mentioned something. We've been a Fresh partner for a number of years now, and there's been a real massive shift in the way they approach that, and it's great to see that momentum continuing to the point, as we saw evidenced at Refresh.
Absolutely. And a big shout out to our partner manager, John Hargensen. Woo!
If you're listening, John, leave a comment.
Yeah, exactly. Let's find out, because John, if you're not listening, and don't say 19 minutes and 20 seconds, right, I was called out, then we know you've not listened to this podcast. Moving on.
All right. What else did we want to share with our listeners, Sonil? There was
well, so maybe one other point that's worth picking up, I think, around the market positioning. So I was privileged to be invited to the sounds very swanky, this Diamond Club dinner afterwards, where we were all given a 10-carat diamond to take home. No, but we were fed very well, actually. It was more than just a leathery bit of football that they gave us. It was a lovely, lovely dinner. So I was lucky enough to be sat on the same table as Ashwin Bilal, I think his surname is. Excuse me if I've got that wrong. The CIO of Freshworks, and also a consultant who they had brought on board to help drive some of the product roadmap and direction. And it seems pretty clear to me that Freshworks are upwardly mobile, by which I mean that historically probably their sweet spot was the sort of 30 to 100 maybe seat customer, and that's mid-market, isn't it? Now with the development of the product, with greater presence in the market, and with, I think, quite a lot of renewed confidence actually and focus, that they see their sweet spot as 100 plus seats, and actually pushing into the enterprise now, 500, 1,000 seat organizations, that size and scale. So they're not saying we're going to displace ServiceNow from HSBC. That's not what they're saying, but what they are focused on is that small enterprise space. And I think that's very interesting, right? That's a sign of a confident organization who's identified a market opportunity in that space and is trying to go for that. And they have geared up at C-suite, with the CIO, with Dennis Woodside coming on board as the new CEO, etc. They're gearing up at C-suite and then pushing that down through the organization to say, hey, listen, this is where we want to be. This is where we can win. So that's very interesting.
Yeah, I think fair to say as well, and I'm sure you'll agree, Sonal, is that they've definitely got a very clear execution strategy on how they're going to go about that. That's apparent. Difficult to put your finger on exactly what that might be, but it's certainly palpable. Yeah.
The one thing I would say about that, though, is that it is quite a contended space, right? Because everybody, not everybody, that's not true, but there are many players who are also gunning for that piece of the market. Halo in the UK is, and increasingly internationally, is one of those. Atlassian with Jira Service Management, I think, would see themselves playing very much in that space as well. So it's pretty contended. They have to differentiate. I think they've got a handle on how they're doing that. But it is, it is definitely a market opportunity as well.
100%. We talked a little bit about the messaging, uncomplicated. I think, is it worth just sort of talking a little bit more about some of the other call outs on that, Sonal? Or do we don't want to complicate things too much?
Yeah, let's leave it as uncomplicated. You will hear the word uncomplicated many times if you engage with the Freshworks rep, and as you might hear, other phrases from other vendors as well. So.
All right, so what next then? I guess is a kind of good point to close out.
Yeah,
the review. What's happening next? Where do we go collectively from here?
Yeah, so there is an objective in Freshworks as I understand it, and I hope I'm not going to get in trouble for saying this. I don't think so, but the objective, I think, is to get the business to be a $1 billion turnover business, and so that represents growth of somewhere in the region of 30 to 50%, something like that, I believe. I don't have the exact numbers of where they are now, but there is certainly a feeling within the exec team, the people that I spoke to, and the management team as well, that is a very achievable growth number, and that they're well positioned to push onto that and then beyond it as well. So, expect to see an increase, certainly in the UK and Irish market. I would think that means customer acquisition. The way Freshworks is set up is they have two teams in field, as they call it. One is expansion, right? So existing customers trying to expand the footprint. The other is new business. I would expect to see them drive forward in both of those areas. They still have a focus on the SMB space. They still want to sell to smaller organizations, but the field team is concentrated on the bigger opportunities, or the bigger customers, I guess you could say. So expect to see that continued push to get to that $1 billion. One thing that I don't think really came up, and maybe I missed it, I don't know what your perception was, Dan, was the Device 42 play. I mean, how much did that feature? I didn't see all that much of it.
Yeah, there wasn't a huge amount of discussion around that. And maybe it's kind of because they have a product focus, and it's going to be Freshservice and Freshdesk have recognized that that's where they're going to focus their efforts on product evolution and product enhancement. And I do remember in one of the sessions that a couple of questions came up, and they had some folks from Device 42 there to kind of field that off. I believe, and this wasn't explicitly called out from memory, but the sort of more native integration within Device 42 is certainly on their product roadmap, as you'd expect, right, from an acquisition and the capabilities there, and how that's playing out. So I expect to see a bit more of a fold-in for that, but nothing was really shouted about from the Device 42 space.
Yeah, so I think looking forward 12 months to refresh next year, that will be a much bigger part of the story. And I think fundamentally it has to be a much bigger part of the story, because if you are competing in the enterprise space, then ITSM and ITOM are two functions that go very well together. I think that if you are looking to develop your AI capability, and in particular your agentic AI capabilities, then you have to have the right data in the platform for agentic AI, or for agents to be able to enact in the way they should do. So I would be amazed if D42 isn't a much bigger part of what gets talked about next year, and they will be looking back at the benefits of that acquisition, but more importantly, looking forward at the opportunities that it presents them and customers.
And it follows the market trend that we're seeing as well, right? With the other players that some names we've mentioned, and they're all looking at that broader approach.
Yeah.
So
absolutely. Yeah.
Tracking certainly.
Yeah.
So no, I don't know what else there is to add, really.
One more thing, I would say that everyone there was talking about more people next year, right? A bigger event.
Yeah. Bigger event, more people.
Yeah.
So who knows where it'll be? Maybe it'll be on the pitch of Wembley next time. Yeah. Were you there at Refresh? Did you have a different experience to us? Did you find it as fantastic as we did? Would you have liked to have a conversation with us, but we were too busy at the stand? Please leave a comment, get in touch if you've got any questions. And thank you very much for listening. See you on the next one.
Thank you.